Hey, remember this video? Yeah, hopefully by now it's got more than 11 views. Anyway, we're back to this series again after more than 2 months, finally. Awesome. So let's just jump right into it. If you need any description on how I'm doing the scoring for these categories, I very strongly encourage you to watch the first episode of this. Charge the Enemy is a mostly air-to-ground mission. It does have a few things that stand out, but overall it's not anything too special. To be completely honest, I'm willing to call it just an extension of the tutorial Charge Assault. That being said, the handholding is pretty much gone here, so you are on your own for the most part. We're gonna just jump straight into the soundtrack here, but a quick refresher on how the scoring on the soundtrack works is, does it fit well with the mission, and how much do I like the soundtrack personally? Charge the Enemy consists of 2 soundtracks that play. The first one is called Eastern Wind, the second one is called Unmanned Craft. To be completely honest here, Eastern Wind I think is an overall solid song. The intensity does build up the later on that you get into it, and I really have no complaints about it whatsoever. Initially I was gonna say it was close to on par with Charge Assault, but I'm honestly tempted to go and rank it exactly the same at this point, so I'm gonna give Eastern Wind a 4 out of 5. Unmanned Craft, on the other hand, I'm not a huge fan of the song. It does capture the tension of the unexpected launch of the UAVs that show up in the second half of the mission, and how you're forced to fight them, and these are new enemies you've never fought before. So it does capture that tension, but as a song by itself, it's not something I'd rather listen to that much, so I am going to give it a 3 out of 5. So to average the 2 out, we've got a 4 for Eastern Wind and a 3 for Unmanned Craft, giving Charge the Enemy a score of 3.5 out of 5 for soundtrack. So for mission length, the level itself doesn't really lock you into a specific pacing that you need in order to complete the mission, and at no point did I ever find myself thinking that the mission ended too quickly or that the mission dragged on. Overall, I don't really have too many complaints about Charge the Enemy's pacing or its mission length. The closest that I would actually go to saying that I have a problem with the mission length is the second part of the mission where you're fighting the drones. The game only gives 5 drones as enemies, and I totally understand that we are in the early stages of the game, so they're not trying to overwhelm the player. That being said, if you're really quick at dispatching the drones, this could end too quickly, but overall, given that your allies don't actually do anything to destroy said drones, you get a decent dogfight out of it anyway, so that's really the only gripe about the pacing of the mission here, so I'll give it a 4.5 out of 5 for mission length. Alright, moving on to types of enemies. The enemies have a good selection of air and ground targets, and they consist of radar vehicles, fuel tanks, APCs, AA guns, MiG-21s, helicopters, 5 MQ-99 drones, and a unique ace named Jester. Let me start with the fuel tanks here. So obviously the fuel tanks don't shoot back. That being said, they are clumped close together, which is some nice foreshadowing towards what's going to be going on in pipeline destruction. So I like that because you shoot one, you blow up like 4 of them. To discuss the named ace, they don't really engage you, rather they will fly around aimlessly and just kind of avoid your missiles, or they'll attempt to leave the map, so not really a threat, or I guess not a threat at all to the player. Despite being a good selection of enemies, I think the biggest problem that I have with them, okay, 2 problems. The first one being the sparsely laid out placement of enemies. You don't have a overly large concentration of them. It's enough to indicate that, hey, they are there, but there's not like tons and tons of them. The second issue that I have with it is just generally the lack of challenge, but I'm willing to partially forgive this one given that we are only on the second mission of the game. That being said, all in all, I'm going to give types of enemies a 3 out of 5. There is some diversity in the enemies, definitely more than what's in Charge Assault, but just the general distribution and the general threat level to the player is not up there with some of the other missions, so I can't rank it that high. This brings us to objectives and failure conditions. We've got 8 radar vehicles on the map. Destroy them in any order that you want. After a certain amount of time has passed, there are going to be interceptors that show up to try to hamper your progress. If you've destroyed all the radar vehicles before dealing with the interceptors, they become your next target. In addition to any remaining MiG-21s that you haven't destroyed, you will also get, I think, 2 or 3 transport planes and a control tower in the enemy airfield to also destroy. After about 3 enemies are remaining, you will have a very short amount of time, maybe 10 or 15 seconds, to destroy the remaining enemies before the second phase of the mission begins. After this tiny amount of time has passed, the MQ-99s then get launched, and they become your next target. Your final objective is then to shoot down the 5 MQ-99s that were launched. Any remaining MiG-21s from the previous section of the mission quickly get dispatched by your allies or magically shot down. Whether you consider this to be a plus or a minus, that's up to you. So in terms of failure conditions on this mission, there are a total of 3, which are getting shot down, crashing, and running out of time. So all in all, I'm going to give objectives and failure conditions a score of 4 out of 5. To wrap everything up, we've got the degree of BS. Yeah, there's none. So we don't need to worry about this one here. Score of 0. So unlike Charge Assault, Charge the Enemy does get a few bonus points for a few interesting things that I think the level does. Going to begin with Jester and the fact that you can literally delete him before he has a chance to play the game. You also have the ability to fly under the power lines. That's a big deal for me, so I'm counting it. You can also accomplish the first objective of the mission in a variety of different ways, which is pretty nice. So you can take out the radar vehicles before the optional targets, and then the interceptors become the targets. You can destroy everything and take out the radar vehicles, and then you only have to destroy the transport planes and the control tower. I do like how Project Aces did go and have a little bit of flexibility in the order in which you complete the mission, because it then allows the players to run the mission a bit differently each time, and it's cool to see the actual mission react to how the player plays. Furthermore, there is some nice foreshadowing to a point later on in the game where IFF starts becoming a big deal and identifying targets becomes a big deal. It is when Knocker talks about how the IFF is reliable, and I find that's kind of interesting given the fact that all of the satellites and everything get taken out later on in the game.
Okay, recruits, pay attention to who's on what side. The newest IFF is connected to our entire force via satellites. It's reliable, so trust your radars.
So with all this in mind, I'm going to give Charge the Enemy about 2 for bonus points. Charge the Enemy is receiving a 3.5 for its soundtrack, a 4 for its objectives and failure conditions, a 3 for types of enemies, a 4.5 for mission length, 0 for degree of BS, and 2 bonus points, bringing the total score of Charge the Enemy to 15 out of 20 without bonus points, and 17 out of 20 with bonus points.
I'll get $1.
By the way they look and move, that doesn't matter.
How are you?